Hey everybody, Guitars and Synths. I'm working on getting my Octatrack as the master clock to sync my Rytm and my Analog 4. So folks are helping me on a forum. I am getting the tempo to sync between the Octatrack and the Rytm, which is good because I always have problems before. But now I'm still having problems. I'm not getting this to sync with Analog 4, so it's the opposite problem. So what I did is I have the MIDI out cable going to the MIDI in cable on my Rytm, so that's working. Then I have the MIDI out sync A going to the MIDI through on the sync B. Now I wonder if I change this to MIDI in, if that will fix it. So, because someone said MIDI through, but that didn't work. So let's try something. Let's do MIDI in and see if that works. That seems to work, right? Okay, so it looks like, yeah, because I mean, if you're gonna send MIDI clock out, my whole point of this, fellow Elektronauts and synth friends who have Elektron gear or want to have Elektron gear, is I want my Octatrack to be my brain for these three, the Trinity, right? The Octatrack, the Rytm, and Analog 4, the Trinity, the divine Trinity of Elektron flagships. So, and then these two, I could clock them, but they're kind of a different type of music I'm running on a separate track, so that's why I don't have them clocked. You can MIDI sync the analog key with other gear, which is cool. I didn't, it's kind of neat. So, and this has MIDI as well. So I technically probably could find a way to sync these up if I wanted to. Probably would have to do something like send a MIDI. So this MIDI out is going to the MIDI in. So I probably have to do a MIDI out sync A to the MIDI in on a digitone if I wanted to do that. I'll try it at some point. I got these phonic cases. They're the best cases for Elektron stuff. I have other cases that are not as good. These just fit my gear like a glove. So they're expensive, but they're really good. So anyways, looks like they're syncing up because when I check the tempo, if I change the tempo on the Octatrack, let's see, it'll change 90. So I have it to 91. There is some lag. So they're getting in sync more or less. So now for those of you who need to set MIDI up, if you're new, the way I set it up is, and I'm not saying I don't use this all the time. So yeah, I go to, let me just stop this. So if it stops it, and I'm gonna, if I stop it, it stops, right? So that's good. So I'm gonna undo the tempo metronome thing on these. And if I start, it starts. So it is sending MIDI, right? Because if you press play, it starts these, which is good, right? And if I do stop, it stops. So they're in sync. So the way you set this up, and let me undo that because I'm not setting up MIDI channels. So you don't only do what you're gonna do with MIDI channels. If you go to your project button on your Octatrack, Elektron Octatrack, and you press project, there's a screen here to set up your MIDI. And you can do it a few different ways. I usually first go to MIDI, and I use these down arrows. So, and I usually go to control. So this, I don't have to change anything. I go to sync, and I click on sync. So this is what I have, send, for transport and clock. I'm not receiving, because I'm not trying to have another device as my MIDI clock, and I do have this send, so it can send MIDI channels. Now that's all I have on that. Now if I go to channels, this is what I have. Now I'm not trying to sequence my Analog 4 or my Rytm from the Octatrack. You can do that. I did it with my Virus and other gear. But I'm not trying to do that. I just want them all in sync because they all have sequencers, so I don't really need to sequence it from the Octatrack. So, okay, so that's the first thing I did on this. You got to set that up. And I have the Analog 4 and the Rytm going into my Octatrack. And the reason I do that is I can have the output of all three go to my mixer. I'm using a 6-channel Keith McMillan K mixer, which I love. It's fantastic. It's got faders. It's just, I love it. It's a great mixer. With that said, I'm doing it for 2 reasons. 1, I just have a central point. 2, I can sample. So Octatrack's a sampler. I can sample my Rytm and my Analog 4 if I want to. And then I can do some cool stuff with scenes and things like that with the Octatrack. So that's why I do, 2 reasons I'm doing that. So I can sample and also apply effects and a lot of reasons. Now, second thing you gotta do is you gotta go and configure MIDI on Analog 4. That's not too hard. You just press this little gear shape button and you go over here, and the screen is very similar. So the good thing about Elektron gear is the workflow is very similar. So learning it is pretty easy once you know one. Go down to MIDI config, hit yes, sync yes. So we're not sending clock because we're not trying to control the Octatrack. We just want to get MIDI clock from the Octatrack. So receive and transport receive, and then program channel receive. We're not sending. So make sure that if you're going to use your Octatrack as your central clock, you do not have this button checked. You'll have some weird things going on if you do. So you're just receiving clock and transport. And get out of that. Port config, I don't think you have to change anything. Oh, you do want to make sure this has MIDI, at least MIDI, and you can do MIDI. You can do MIDI, you can do USB. Don't do USB, that's if you're using Overbridge. We're not. MIDI plus USB. So you can pick MIDI or USB, MIDI plus USB, or you can pick MIDI. So I use Overbridge with this quite a bit, so I have MIDI plus USB. But if you have just USB, it won't work, and you'll be wondering how come I'm not getting clock from the Octatrack. So then these are MIDI. So I just get out of that, go to my channels. This, we're not going to change anything. This is if you're going to do a bunch of weird stuff. I'm not. So get out of that. She's good. I like the Analog 4 because you can control modular gear with it as well, and semi-modular gear. This was my first synthesizer I bought like 6 years ago. Someone told me to get one after I really liked the Elektron workflow for machine drum, and he wouldn't sell me as machine drum because I was going to get into modular at some point, and I'm glad I got this because I can control through the, you have CV outputs, and it's really easy to set up. I did get modular sequencers later, but this is great. You can do that. Okay, last thing you got to do is go into your Rytm. Those of you who have a Rytm, press the little gear shift button. So the good thing is it's the same icon on a lot of Elektron gear, little gear icon, I call it. Press that, go over to your Rytm menu, and you notice it looks almost the same, so it's pretty easy. Go down to, scroll down to MIDI config, type yes. First option, sync, clock receive, clock send. You know, I'm going to uncheck that because I'm not sending clock. I don't care about that. I just want to receive clock. Maybe I should have it checked. It didn't mess anything up. And transport send. So I don't think you need, maybe I can do that too as well. I don't know. We'll try it out. But anyways, that's what you got to do. You got to at least have the receive and transport on. So I get out of that, port config, MIDI plus USB, same thing. Get out of that. Channels. This is only if you're going to like do MIDI programming or not. And just click no. So with that said, I'm going to do a test. If I press play on this, I want to see what will happen. Oh, so it actually does send a MIDI clock to the Analog 4, but not to the Octatrack because I'm sending MIDI out to the Analog 4, right? But not to the Octatrack. So it's interesting. So if I want to, if I don't want to use my Octatrack, I just want to play these. I can play these, right? I'm going to turn my. Right? But if I don't, That's cool. So I guess the way I have it set up now is if I want to kind of use these two together, but I don't want to use my Octatrack for whatever reason, I can just have it set up like that. So I have the MIDI out going to the MIDI in on the analog 4. And I have the MIDI in coming from the Octatrack MIDI out. So I have to say the Elektron gear, the MIDI is really good. It's a good implementation. It does a lot. Maybe at some point I'll hook up MIDI with these. Right now I'm just kind of just doing one thing at a time, just to simplify my workflow. But now if I press this, right, let's see if I can, let's see if my tempos are in sync now. So, all right, turn the volume down a little bit. I'll make sure my tempos are in sync. All right, so yeah, they're all in sync, so I'm happy. So it's doing what it wants, I want it to do. And I have the option of being able to use just these two, right, if I want to. And I do like anime. So this is an anime clip from this anime called Kami ga Kill, and I highly recommend it. It's a very good anime. I sampled into my Octatrack. I have a bunch of anime clips and movie clips on this. So you can do crazy stuff. The Octatrack has the highest learning curve, but it's totally worth it. It can do a lot. So it's going to be the central brain of my Elektron gear. Anyways, thoughts, tips, when I'm doing right, when I'm doing wrong. Appreciate the help. Happy New Year, everyone.